Hello, it's Paul Beckwith again, and this is part two, so please make sure you watch part one. I'm talking about coronavirus, the hammer and the dance. I'm talking about the actions that countries must take to avoid their healthcare systems being overwhelmed, and or at least to have them as they're going to be overwhelmed, okay, but to do what we can at this stage, to do everything that we can to prevent mass deaths. And we're talking over 10 million in the US with no action. So I'll just continue right where I left off. Okay, so just to remind you from the previous video, I'm talking about Coronavirus, the Hammer and the Dance, the article by Thomas Puyo. So let's go back down to where we are here. And the mitigation strategy. We can't prevent the virus, so let's run its course, but reduce the peak of infection, flatten the curve a bit to make it more manageable for the healthcare system. So this is an image that was in the Imperial College study, where you do nothing and you start to do things like close schools and universities, case isolation, household quarantine added, social distancing, and you flatten the curve. Okay, so if you flatten the curve, then the ICUs will collapse for months. Okay, they'll still collapse. So some mitigation is done, but we know that the healthcare system will be overwhelmed, driving the fatality rate up by a factor of 10 when it's overwhelmed. And the whole idea of this is that we will get herd immunity, which will then let the system recover. But so this is the core of the strategy. Look, I know it's going to be hard for some time, but once we're done and a few million people die, the rest of us will be immune to it, so this virus will stop spreading and we'll say goodbye to the coronavirus. Better do it once and be done with it, because our alternative is to do social distancing for up to a year and risk having this peak happen later anyways. Except this assumes one thing, that the virus doesn't change too much. If it does change, and then lots of people get immunity, but at some point the epidemic dies down. But if the virus mutates, then that immunity is for an older virus, right? So here's mutations in the coronavirus. Here's where it started, and here's where it initially took off in China, the blue mutations, and then it went to Europe, Italy, and through Europe, the green mutations, and in North America, it's the red mutation. So the virus does change. And this isn't surprising, because RNA-based viruses like the coronavirus or the flu tend to mutate around 100 times faster than DNA-based ones. Okay, so the best way for the virus to mutate is to have millions of opportunities to do so, which is exactly what a mitigation strategy would provide. Hundreds of millions of people infected. This is why you get a flu shot every year. It's different. Right? There's so many flu strains, new ones are evolving, it can never protect against all strains, the flu shot. So the mitigation strategy not only assumes millions of deaths for a country like the US or UK, it gambles on the fact that the virus won't mutate too much, which we know it does. And it will give it an opportunity to mutate. So once we're done with a few million deaths, we could be ready for a few million more every year. Okay, it could become a recurring fact of life. Fact of death, like the flu, but many times deadlier. Okay, the best way for this virus to mutate is to have millions of opportunities to do so, which is exactly what a mitigation strategy would provide. So that doesn't work. It's no good. So we need suppression. We need to get the R factor below 1, flatten the epidemic, not just flatten the curve, but bring it right down. Okay, so go hard right now. This is the hammer. Order heavy social distancing. Get this thing under control, 3 to 7 weeks. Then release the measures so that people can gradually get back their freedoms and something approaching normal social and economic life can resume. So what does it look like? This is what the suppression case looks like. We hit it hard with interventions. The infected cases goes up and comes down, and it minimizes the total dead. Again, this is the epidemic calculator. If you just Google epidemic calculator, GabGo, GitHub, you find it, and you can play around with all the numbers and do the modeling yourself. Under a suppression strategy, after the first wave is done, the death toll is in the thousands, not in the millions. Why? Because we cut the exponential growth of cases, we cut the fatality rate since the healthcare system is not completely overwhelmed. So a fatality rate of 0.9% would be typical. That's what's being seen in South Korea. So this is a no-brainer. We have to suppress. We have to hit the virus with a hammer. Now, governments fear that the first lockdown will last for months, which seems unacceptable to people. A month-long lockdown would destroy the economy, and it wouldn't solve the problem because it would just be postponing the epidemic. Later on, once we release the social distancing measures, people will still get infected in the millions and die. Okay, but this is not the case. But the Imperial College team modeled this, and this is what they got. They found it reappearing here. Okay, but this is completely missing the point, according to this article. It doesn't look very appealing to do suppression versus mitigation. Either a lot of people die soon, and we don't hurt the economy today, or we hurt the economy today just to postpone the deaths. But this ignores the value of time. The value of time is to save lives. Every day, every hour we waited to take measures, this exponential threat continued spreading. A single day could reduce the total cases by even 40%. So if you do a hammer on one day, you can save 40% of the deaths versus if you do the hammer on the next day. So time is super valuable. So here's the thing. What if you're about to face your worst enemy, of which you knew very little, and you had two options? Either you run towards it or you escape to buy yourself time to prepare. You'd always choose the latter option, right? Every single day we delay the virus, we can get better prepared. And here's what time will buy us. So in China, they hit the hammer here, and recorded cases still went up for 12 days, so almost a 2-week delay, but they kept the hammer in place. True cases plummeted, and they got the system under control. There's 0 daily cases in the entire 60 million big region of Hubei. Okay, so suppression would get us fewer total cases, immediate relief for the healthcare system and the humans who run it, reduction in fatality rate, reduction in collateral damage, the ability for infected, isolated, and quarantined healthcare workers to get better and back to work. In Italy, healthcare workers represent 8% of all contagions, okay? So we have to test and trace, test and trace. Right now, the US and UK have no idea about their true cases. They don't know how many there are. The official number is not right. The true one is in the many, many-fold more cases because they're not testing and they're not tracing. Within a few more weeks, so that 3 to 7 week of shutdown, we could get our testing in order and start testing everybody. Not just test people for the virus, but do these antibody tests to test people that have had the virus to see if they're now immune to the virus. Okay, so we could do tracing, contact tracing, identify all the people who are sick, every sick person that they met, put them in quarantine, give us a ton of intelligence on our social distancing measures, etc., etc. It would allow us to build up capacity to get the masks and the personal protection equipment and everything that we need. It buys us time. We have more time to buy equipment for a future wave. We can build up our production of masks, PPEs, ventilators, oxygen devices, any critical device to reduce the death rate. So we don't need years to get armor for our system. We need weeks. We need to get our production humming now, mobilize, do everything right now. Okay, we need healthcare workers as soon as possible, training people, bringing people out of retirement. Okay, and tell people exactly what is going on. No fake news, no fake information, no talk about sacrificing older people for the Tao. Hey, sacrifice grandma for the Tao. I mean, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. It lets us understand the virus more. Here's the speed of the coronavirus research. Preprints, not peer-reviewed, and publications. This is approaching 300 by February 21st. This number has continued to climb up. It lets us understand things so we can understand how the virus spreads exactly, how to slow down contagion, how many people are asymptotic, are they contagious, when, treatments, how long does it survive the virus, on what surfaces, how do social distancing measures reduce the transmission rate, what's the cost, how do we trace contacts, how reliable are our tests. All of this stuff is very important. We can find treatments, we can understand the cost benefit. So let's have a look. So the hammer and the dance. Okay, so this is basically crucial. The hammer. No, so the dance is once you suppress the thing. Well, the hammer here, do nothing mitigation. The hammer suppression. How long will it last? Okay, so they in the Imperial College they talked about a huge suppression here, a huge time of things being shut down. But if you look at the hammer is needed for weeks, not months. If you look at Wuhan, if you look at other countries, that South Korea, etc., that have hit it, then it lasts for weeks, 3 to 7 weeks, and then you need the dance. So this is the suppression. This is what we do to suppress. Do nothing, not acceptable. Mitigation, just everything's overwhelmed, millions of deaths. We apply the hammer here. We have to wait a few weeks to see the curve peak and flatten, but we have to we won't see that initially. We might not see nothing for the first week or 10 days even, and then the curve turns over. So that we learn, we cut the virus growth, we understand true cases, recruit personnel, improve treatments, get proper testing, release healthcare system pressure, build capacity, understand the cost benefit of measures. This is 3 to 7 weeks. And then we do the dance. We start we have to keep the R below 1. We do proper testing, contact tracing, quarantining, isolating, public education on hygiene, social distancing, ban large gatherings. Most restrictions, however, are removed. People go back to work. We tighten up when needed if it starts to rise again. Okay, so we've learned and we control this. This is what South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan have been doing. Okay, so the dance of R, if we relax too much too quickly, then R goes above 1, and the contagion starts increasing, and then we see that happening because we're measuring everything, and we lower it again to below 1. We learn, and we figure out what we're doing. It buys us time. If R is above 1, infections grow exponentially into an epidemic. If it's below 1, they die out. So we dance. We do the dance to keep R above 1. It's going to go above 1 as we relax too much. We notice that from the measurements and monitoring, and then we lower it back again as much as possible. In Wuhan, it's calculated that R was initially 3.9. After the lockdown and centralized quarantine, it went down to 0.32. But as you move into the dance, you don't need to do that anymore. You just keep your R below 1. And here's what we do. So this is the transmission rate during the coronavirus stages in patients. Asymptotic, so no symptoms, say 30%. Mild, moderate, say 50%. So this is the time over what happens. So the no symptoms people never have symptoms. The mild, moderate cases, no symptoms for maybe 5 or 6 days, and you get symptoms for 5 or 6 days. Hospitalization perhaps and recovery. In the severe cases, in the mild and moderate, you get recovery without hospitalization needed. Critical case, about 4%, no symptoms, symptoms severe, hospitalization, ventilation, ICU, and perhaps death or recovery. So this is sort of the time frame. This is about 2.5 contagions. Number of contagions per day. If you add the area under the curve, it's about 2.5. Okay, so what you have to do is recognize that, and what you do is you want to build up to. This is the R value, and how now these numbers are estimated, but it shows you the idea. R is 2.5 at first. Warm and humid weather might lower it to 2.2, 2.3. Lower than average people density with socialization might lower it to just above 2. Aggressive testing, lower, in isolation, maybe 1.75. Hand washing, education, 1.6 or something. Contact tracing, down. Disinfection, etc. Banning gatherings. You get R below 1. Okay, and you can lower it right down by closing all these essential things, which you do initially with the hammer, but then the dance, you start opening these things up. You keep R below 1. If it goes above 1, you can tell from your testing, and you bring them back in again. So this is what we need to do. And you can put costs on all of these things and look at the benefit of R. And this is what countries need to do. Make sure you read this article and spread it to as many people as possible. Thanks for listening.